Well, hello everyone. This is Barry Jones with SP History, back for another episode in the series Miami Conspiracy Town. And we are preparing to begin episode number 5 in the series. And if you've been following along, you know that in episode 1, I talked about the militant Cubans who had the exiles who had fled Cuba and come to Miami after the Castro Revolution. With the idea of it being a temporary place to live, an idea of launching a counter-revolution from Miami shores to retake Cuba so they could go back home. And these are mostly men of military age. Secondly, in episode 2, we talked about the organized crime element that had their own motives wanting to get rid of Castro, also concentrated in the city of Miami. And in the last 2 episodes, I've been talking about the CIA elements, and this is the third installment in that little sub-series of the CIA personnel. I call it the CIA operators. And by sheer numbers alone, there's quite a few of these CIA operators, and their stories are pretty dramatic. And so I'm fleshing out those stories and showing their connection to Miami. And my overall goal in this is to show all of the different disparate groups with their separate own unique motives to want to get rid of Castro coming together. One, because of proximity, they're all in the same city, operating in the same city, but two, because they have the same interests. Obviously, the Cubans want to go home. The organized crime wants to get back into Cuba. They're losing $100 million a year being kicked out. And the CIA wants Fidel Castro out of its hemisphere, or any communist influence, especially 90 miles off the coast of Florida. So we have all these different. Now, I just gave you a motive for the CIA that is legitimate. There was also an illegitimate motive, and that was to restart or kickstart the heroin trade that they had gotten used to, the lucrative heroin trade coming out of the Far East, the Golden Triangle, and flowing through Cuba when Batista was in charge, our puppet, and into the cities and streets of the United States, where the CIA sort of that oversaw this whole heroin trade. And all the money that they made was dark money that was used to finance so many of their covert operations in the 50s. So there are several reasons for the CIA wanting to get rid of Castro. So they're all in the same place together. The stories I want to tell today, one of the two of the stories are sort of woven together. They intersect. That's the story of Marita Lorenz and E. Howard Hunt. These are CIA operators operating out of Miami. And then the third one is George Joanides, which is, we didn't really learn much about George Joanides until after the House Select Committee in the late 70s. He turns out to be a real pivotal figure. And so we'll talk about him as well. So these are the three CIA operators we want to talk about in today's episode. And I've entitled this series Miami Conspiracy Town, South Florida, Little Havana, and the JFK assassination conspiracy. I think it bears repeating. Uh, there are cities involved in the conspiracy, and then there is the city, and Miami is the city. New Orleans was handy to sheep dip Lee Harvey Oswald, the patsy, setting them up. And Dallas became the ideal location because it succeeded. You know, they tried earlier in Chicago. They tried earlier in Miami. They tried earlier in Tampa. There was going to be an attempt in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. It just so happened to succeed in Dallas. So, of the three cities, I would rank Miami as the most important, and I don't think it's even close. All right, let's talk about Marita Lorenz. I did a series on her, just her, earlier in my JFK material. If you want to refer back to that. But let's weave this story in with E. Howard Hunt in Miami. Born in Germany to an American mother, and whose mom was an actress, and then turned spy for Britain and France, and her father was a ship captain. So she comes from an interesting family, to say the least. Mom was sort of a celebrity, and then she became a spy for Britain and France. And then, of course, her father, because of his job, traveled all around the world. And a lot of times, Marita went with him. So this is going to be someone who is well traveled and has sort of a cosmopolitan view of life and some of the big personalities that she's going to run into in her travels with her father. Then some tragedy strikes obviously during World War II. Her family gets sent to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp because obviously her mom being a spy for Britain and France, the Nazis are going to punish the family. She was only 5 years old at the time, and one of the fortunate ones because they lived. The Lorenz family was eventually freed by the British, and after the war, the family moved to the United States in 1950. So quite a background here for this young Maria Lorenz. As I mentioned, she often traveled with her father on his ships, and in 1959, she's been in America for 9 years at this point. In 1959, so she's a young woman at this point, and she travels with her father to Cuba. This is right on the cusp of Castro's revolution. All right, and she when her father's ship enters Havana Harbor, she was 19 years old at the time. A group of bearded men came aboard the ship. And when she asked about the tallest and the one who seemed to be in charge, his response was, quote, "Yo soy Cuba," which means I am Cuba. It made quite an impression on young Marita. Uh, Castro had only been in power a few days when they first met, so this is the heyday of the revolution. Everyone's caught up in the emotion of the moment, and he says, "I am Cuba." It's a pretty outlandish thing to say, but it made quite an impression. She was a strikingly beautiful young woman, and Fidel had a lust for women. If you ever do any study of Fidel Castro and his lifestyle in Cuba, he virtually had his pick of all the Cuban girls. Of course, this is one from America, and she's entered into his uh, domain, so to speak. And so, anyway, it's a target-rich environment for Fidel Castro, and they have an instant liking for each other. She gives him a tour of the ship, and he asks for her phone number while they're going around on the ship. It was interesting. I wondered where Daddy was at that time. But anyway, after a few days, Castro calls her on the phone and asks her to come to Cuba in his private plane. He's just sent a plane for her. And as at this point that she and Castro became lovers, and it began this torrid affair, and Marita got pregnant. And this is not anything that's like a conspiracy theory. There's pictures all around of here Fidel Castro showing her a young Marita Lorenz, showing her in a Jeep around Havana. There's a picture top left of her in at about this age, and then top right, kissing Fidel. And of course, she was sort of the it girl in Cuba at the time, and I'm sure there were a lot of other girls that were pining to be the it girl. So she was the object of a lot of probably positive attention, probably some negative attention as well, especially considering the fact she's not from America or not from Cuba. She's from America. All right, the story takes a turn when she becomes pregnant. And she's drinking a glass of milk one day. And when I heard her speak, she said she was heavily pregnant. So I don't know if that means 9 months, 8 months, whatever. But it was during the time she was drinking that glass of milk, which she believes was poisoned. And she suddenly blacked out. And when she came to a few hours later, she found herself seriously ill, and there's no baby. She's no longer pregnant. Um, Lorenz blamed the CIA for this, Obvious. I'm sure Fidel Castro was whispering in her ear, or his people were whispering in her ear. But anyway, she blames the CIA for the loss of her baby. And she says that they must have drugged her, they induced her labor, and they stole her baby. This is kind of, outlandish, obviously. She gets so sick, the Cuban doctors can't treat her, so she's flown home to New York. And during her time in the hospital there, she's visited by the CIA. Remember, she's blaming the CIA for the loss of her baby. And at this point, the CIA tells her, no, this is what really happened. Castro arranged for you to be given a late-term abortion. He didn't want your child. And according to Marita, she said, I didn't believe it at first, but they did a good job of brainwashing me, telling me that he did this to me. It left me heartbroken. And so she's clearly someone who is easily manipulated. And, when she's with Castro, she's blaming the CIA. Now she's with the CIA, she's blaming Castro. Anyway, she believed the agents, and they're priming her. Okay. The story they're telling her is not true. We find out later. Not entirely true. What happened to her did happen to her as a result of things that took place in Cuba, but it wasn't Castro forcing her to have an abortion. So they lied to her. Or that's what the CIA does, right? And and there's an agenda behind this. There's a motive. Now they start telling her what a threat Castro is to herself, obviously to her baby, and also to America at large. And according to Marita, telling the story later, and it's also in her book, they said, quote, we want you to take him out. And according to Marita, they used me because I was the only one that could get back into his bedroom. So what the CIA is seeing here is potential, and makes me wonder uh, about their level of involvement going all the way back to her time in Cuba, because uh, that this was the beginning of all these operations that we've been discussing, like Operation 40 and Mongoose and Task Force W and S Force, and Executive Act, all these attempts to overthrow and or assassinate Castro. And of course, the trick is trying to get close to him. He had body doubles, he had security bodyguards, uh, he stayed in a different house every night. You just couldn't get close to him. He was very suspicious, and it's one of the reasons why he lived all those years. But here you have somebody who he loves, has been in his bed with him, has made love with him, had a baby with him, or at least got pregnant with him. And if they could if they could get her back to Cuba, and what he knows is that she was flown to New York for medical reasons because of what happened as a result of the baby. Uh, I'm sure he's going to be suspicious that they've turned her, and that's the reason for her returning to Cuba. But it's their best bet. And of course, what do they got to lose? She's, they haven't wasted any training on her, or they don't have anything invested in her. If she dies, she dies. So be it. But what if she lives? What if she succeeds? This could be a real feather in the cap of the CIA, who's trying to figure out a way to take this guy out. And of course, they play on her emotions. She's furious with Castro, um, because this is what she believes, that he caused the loss of a baby. And so she agrees to join the anti-Castro movement. At this point, she moves from New York to Miami because the anti-Castro movement is in Miami. So if you're going to be in this movement, you got to go where the action is. During this time, when she moves to Miami, she meets Frank Sturgis. We talked about Frank Sturgis. And Frank Sturgis, personally, and she's in the anti-Castro movement, she's just sort of a general recruit. She doesn't really know what her purpose is yet, but she learns her purpose when she meets Frank Sturgis. And Sturgis says, we're going to assassinate Castro, and you're going to be the assassin. And they tell her, that we're going to give you these poison pills. All you have to do is go back, act normal. And resume life with your lover, and at some point, when the opportunity is there, sneak these poison pills into Castro's food or drink or whichever, and and you'll be a hero. You'll be a hero, and of course, you'll get your own measure of revenge personally for the loss of your baby as well. So they fly her to Cuba in 1960. They gave her these poison pills. Uh, I've given you some pictures here of Frank Sturgis. All of the Sturgis, uh, every photo has a red circle, and that's Frank Sturgis. So you see, this guy is neck deep in all the anti-Castro stuff, and of course, if you spin it forward all the way to 1972, he's one of the Watergate burglars as well, and all the covert operations in between 59 and 60 and 72, Frank Sturgis is involved in them. And one of his recruits is this Marita Lawrence. So what happens next? She's been flown into Cuba in 1960, and she reunites with her lover, Castro. And she says, this is her word saying this, that she could not go along with the plot once she got there because Castro had some kind of spell on her. And as soon as when she was apart from him, she could gin up her anger and her courage. But as soon as she got in his presence again, she fell under his spell again. And after one particular, in her words, legendary lovemaking session, which this is part of the aura of Fidel Castro, of course, she reveals to him, he asks her flat out, "Are you here to kill me?" And she says, "Yes." She reveals the reason. So you can see that's not going to work. Uh, she returns to Miami afterwards. He lets her go. This is this really shows you Castro's sense of well-being or his confidence that he could see what was coming. In any other situation, if someone is sent to kill Castro and fails, Castro's going to have him killed. But in this case, because it's a woman, possibly because it's somebody he has affections for, possibly also it's more likely that he feels like she's no longer a threat because he has you know figured out what she was sent there to do, and she's admitted it. So she's not ever going to be a threat to him going forward. And why not let her go back and tell her bosses at the CIA that what happened and how he figured it out. And, that's one more thumb in the eye or thumb in the nose from this Cuban dictator, this tin pot, 2-bit Cuban dictator to the mighty United States, the Colossus of the North, right? Anyway, so she returns to Miami, and of course she's constantly reminded time and again of her failure to carry out her mission because we're trying subsequently to kill him and we're failing time after time after time, and everyone can't help but in her circle, in the CIA circle, everyone can't help but wonder how if she had succeeded, it might have saved a lot of people's lives at Bay of Pigs, for example. It might have precluded the need for Operation 40 with the S-Force. So all these things going forward, a lot of people's lives might have been saved. Um, a lot of time and money might have been saved. Anyway, she is reminded over and over and over again, sometimes probably internally from herself, but I would suppose, and she mentioned this when I heard her speak, that Frank Sturgis never let her forget it, right? She told the CIA the operation failed because she put the poison pills in her face cream. And when she went to retrieve them, the face cream had dissolved the pills. That is true. And I mean, according to her account, that did happen. But also, what she didn't tell him is that she confessed to Fidel Castro that she was there and she'd been sent there to kill him. That didn't come out 2 years later when she wrote her book. Anyway, through the efforts of Frank Sturgis, Marita then becomes involved in Operation 40. and she becomes a gun runner. And this sort of becomes her role going forward for Operation 40 and then later Operation Mongoose. And of course, this is only necessary because she'd failed in her attempt to kill him. So they find a different role for her is what they do. She becomes a gun runner. And, I often wondered when I heard this story first, and this was years ago, my initial thought was, well, why would they use a woman for gun running? What can she didn't really have anything. She wasn't wealthy, independently wealthy. She didn't have many connections. Her real connection was Castro himself and their love for each other. Beyond that, what did she have? But uh, over time, I've grown to understand that the CIA was real keen on using females when they could because no one would suspect a female. And they could get in and out of places that men couldn't. And, it's evidenced by the fact that if it had been a man that had been sent in 1960 to kill Castro, he would no longer be alive. She was able to get in, get out. She's still alive. And so there's certain advantages. If you read the story of June or Jerry Cobb, depending upon which name you're going by, that's another reason she was a very prominent member of ZR Rifle, the assassination program plot to kill an American target, and it was a woman, and she was able to just blend and flow around, move from place to place and do things because she's a woman. No one suspects her, and so there is some advantage to having a female in this position. After Bay of Pigs fails spectacularly, there's remember now, Kennedy had made a promise after Bay of Pigs to Khrushchev, we're not going to meddle in the affairs of Cuba anymore. He doesn't intend to keep that promise, but that's what he said to Khrushchev. And so Marina is reassigned again. This time she's assigned to collect donations for the anti-communist cause from the former Venezuelan dictator Marcos Perez Jimenez. Jimenez was another one of these guys who had fled, was his country, Venezuela, and was living in exile in Florida, down in Miami. And so she, like she had with Castro, became his mistress for the next 2 years. Even had a daughter with him. There's a picture of Marina with her daughter she had with Jimenez. Her job is to stay close to him and milk him for all the money he brought, the stolen money, no doubt, money that he brought from Venezuela for the anti-communist cause, and stay close to him and spy on him, essentially, while you're milking him for his money. And if you have to sleep with him, so be it. If I have a baby, so be it. And so that's what she does for the next 2 years. So here is a woman who has now slept with and had babies by. Now, she doesn't know at the time that she actually had a baby, Castro's baby. She thinks it's been aborted. Finds out years later, the baby was actually born. He was alive. So this woman, you talk about a unique position with these dictators from these Latin American countries, one of them being our big enemy, Fidel Castro, having babies with both. So again, this kind of illustrates the point why she's uniquely qualified to do this, to fill this role for the CIA. So in 63, remember now, Bay of Pigs happened in 61. And so from 61 to 63, instead of running guns now, she's married to, or she's the mistress of Jimenez, and she's milking him for money. She's got a baby with him. And the baby is very young, obviously. And so now we're in 1963, and this is the year, obviously, that we're aiming for. And she meets one of the Operation 40 members, Lee Harvey Oswald. She remembers it later, who was secretly recruiting about 30, according to her, 30 anti-Castro Cubans and their American advisors to an assassin squad. This is her recollection of her meeting this guy named Lee Harvey Oswald. She claimed that the group was conspiring to kill Castro and Kennedy. Now, it's interesting. This sort of shines a light into how this plot transitions from killing Castro to killing Kennedy. First, it was all these folks were interested in one thing at first, and that was to kill Castro. And then after Bay of Pigs, you start to see a transition where these same operators begin to believe that Kennedy is equal a threat to Castro. So now it's about killing both of them. And then by the time we get to 63, the transition has become complete. Now it's about taking out Kennedy first, because we're never going to get to Castro if we don't take out Kennedy. So it morphs from exclusively Castro to both to exclusively Kennedy. And it's the same people. And she's sort of giving us a window into that. And she said that Oswald visited a training base in the Everglades, which is right outside Miami, which was overseen by E. Howard Hunt. Now, we've already established that E. Howard, remember there were 5 training bases, and one of them was in No Name Key, one of them was in Swan Island off the east coast of Florida, and then you got the one in the Everglades, which is the liaison there, CIA liaison who oversees that base is E. Howard Hunt. You got the one in No Name Key, which is overseen by Frank Sturgis. Okay, so these are people she knows, and they're running. And those are 3 of the bases. The other 2 are in New Orleans off Lake Pontchartrain. So she knows these people. And these are some pictures from her book of that occasion where now I have a hard time. I put the picture in here. I'm not completely sure about this, but if you look on the bottom, she claims that the tall one there is Oswald, and the guy in the hat is Frank Sturgis. And that does not. First of all, Oswald was not a tall guy. He was not tall at all. And secondly, that does not look like a picture of Oswald. That does not look like what I have gotten used to. An image of Oswald. She claims that's who it was. And in the top photo, you see her in the photo as well, along with their Sturgis again in the same hat. And Oswald, according to her, is on the far left as you look at the photo, and standing with his hands on his hips. So obviously, after the assassination happens and Oswald's photo gets splashed all over television, she's like, "Oh, I know that guy. I know that guy." And so this is the story she will tell later. Where's my cursor? There it is. All right, now this story that I'm fixing to tell you just stays with Maria Lorenz until the 80s. Now, she didn't, it's not because she didn't tell anybody, she did. She told the FBI, but the FBI just ignored her. But in the 80s, attorney Mark Lane finds her. He had researched her. He was researching the assassination, and he found this woman, Maria Lorenz, who'd had this relationship with Castro and this relationship with Frank Sturgis and this relationship with E. Howard Hunt, this relationship with the CIA and all things Operation 40. And he thought, this woman has a story and it could help my case. He was an attorney. And there was a civil lawsuit. The E. Howard Hunt had been named by Liberty Lobby, which is a newspaper, and they had named E. Howard Hunt as being involved in the conspiracy to kill JFK. So E. Howard Hunt had sued Liberty Lobby, and he had won, and he was fixing to get a big settlement. Well, in the appeal, Mark Lane comes on board, and in the intervening period, these cases take years. He had heard about this Maria Lorenz, and he had researched her story. And if he could find her, she could be a star witness in this lawsuit, possibly reverse the case, reverse the findings of the case, the verdict. So she becomes his star witness in this Liberty Lobby appeal in 1985. And this is where, for the first time publicly, she's able to tell the story. Now, a lot of the story I've already told you about her history with the CIA and her history with Castro and how Frank Sturgis recruited her into an assassination program, all that kind of stuff. But she has more, there's more to the story. And she tells the story that in 1963, she was a contact employee of the CIA. She had failed in her single attempt to assassinate Castro. All right, we've already talked about that. And she's recruited at this Miami meeting by Frank Sturgis to help with an off-the-board operation. That's what she's told. It's going to be an off-the-board operation. And of course, she didn't think anything is out of the normal. She's been recruited by Frank Sturgis in the past. This is sort of, for lack of a better term, he is her handler. So if anyone's going to recruit her, it's going to be Frank Sturgis. And she says during this time, she witnessed Sturgis get cash payments from E. Howard Hunt, whom she also knows because of his overseeing the Everglades base. She's been to the Everglades base. Uh, and she says, we were all members of Operation 40. She, Sturgis, and Hunt were all CIA members of Operation 40. And she says that she and Oswald, along with Sturgis and Cuban exile leaders Orlando Bosch and Pedro Diaz-Lanz. Now, we've talked about Orlando Bosch being one of those Cuban militants. Pedro Diaz is another one. So here again, we have these three groups working together. You have Marita, who works for the CIA. You have Sturgis, who works for the CIA. According to her, Oswald was there, who is CIA. And you have these Cuban exiles, Orlando Bosch and Pedro Diaz-Lanz. And she said two others were in this meeting. And this was all taking place in Miami. And they were planning a secret road trip from Miami to Dallas at this meeting. And she's just naming all the participants there in this meeting. She said that they spread Dallas street maps on a table and studied them. And on November 21st, 1963, they left for Dallas in two cars soon after the meeting. They took turns driving. It's a 1,300-mile trip. And she said the trip took about 2 days. And you say, well, what was she doing? By the way, this is top left picture is Frank Sturgis. Top right is Orlando Bosch. Pedro Diaz is pictured bottom left. And then there's Marita Lorenz, bottom right. All right, so according to her testimony, they traveled from Miami to Dallas on November 21st with a trunk full of weapons. So she's doing what she and Sturgis have been doing for years, running guns. So they meet E. Howard Hunt in a Dallas hotel room. And of course, she knows E. Howard Hunt. E. Howard Hunt knows her. So far, everyone who's involved in this little off-the-board mission is doing things that they've been doing for years, running guns. They're just not running into Miami for the purposes of going to Havana. This time they're running them from Miami to Dallas. And the second thing is they're all working together like they have in the past. It's all these same people, right? And they meet in this Dallas hotel room. And again, Hunt pays Sturgis cash money for the weapons at that meeting. And she, according to her, she's there and she observes this whole thing. So she's witness to this. And she says, while they were there, and this is an interesting little detail, they got a knock on the hotel room door. And when they opened the hotel room door, Jack Ruby was standing there. She went on to tell the story about how Jack Ruby came in and looked around, just like, it's interesting. I think all these people knew each other for all these different operations that they've been involved in together for all these years. Well, Jack Ruby also knew all these people, except for one person. He had never met Marita Lorenz. And when he came in, he looked around and felt reassured that everybody in there was people he knew and trusted, except for one. He went to E. Howard Hunt, according to Marita, and he chewed him out. Who is she? Why is she here? And he gave Hunt the third degree over Marita Lorenz's presence there. And it made Marita feel uncomfortable. Like, why is someone taking issue with me being here? All these people, I've been doing this for years with these people. Why am I all of a sudden singled out just because this guy doesn't know me? I don't know him either. And it made her uncomfortable. She starts to sense that this is different from all the previous operations. She says, and this is under oath. Remember now, we've not had any trials in the JFK assassination except for the Clay Shaw trial in the late 60s. And all those witnesses got killed, right? All the ones that were made a difference. And so that was a criminal trial. This is a civil trial. But to this day, that she's still the only one who stood there and took an oath and swore to tell the truth and incriminated the CIA with her testimony. Everybody else who would have incriminated the CIA in the Clay Shaw trial died. David Ferrie, Eladio Del Val, and then of course Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby were killed. Right? Lee Harvey Oswald was killed by Ruby. Ruby was killed by cancer, and so neither one of them could give incriminating. There was never any trial that incriminated the CIA. They always were able to foreclose on that trial by suiciding or killing the witnesses. But here is a living witness who's telling this fantastic story. And now she's telling the jury, she says, about this off the board operation. She says, I knew this was different from the other jobs. This was not just gun running. This was big, very big. And I wanted to get out. She said, I told Sturgis I wanted to leave. He said it was a very big operation, but that my part was not dangerous. I was to be a decoy. If you have seen any of my episodes about Lee Harvey Oswald and CIA tactics, I've made a big point of this, how that's one of the hallmarks of a CIA operation. They always have a decoy. They always have a diversion. And this goes back years to when the CIA was created originally. They actually brought one of the world's foremost magicians in to train their agents on the art of diversion, sleight of hand. He actually put together a manual, a written manual for CIA trainees on how to use the art of diversion to get people looking in one direction when the crime happens in the other location. It's like, and one of the things that he taught was in an assassination, you always have a diversionary shot first, which gets everybody looking in that direction. And if you think about Dallas, the first shot did come from the Texas School Book Depository. That's why a lot of people initially looked in that. That's when the birds flew off the top corner of the building. It got a lot of people's attention. And then the kill shot came on. Everybody's looking over there. The kill shot comes from the grassy knoll. You think about RFK and how he was killed, and Sirhan facing him, shooting like crazy. Everyone's facing Sirhan. Meanwhile, the kill shot comes from right behind RFK's right ear by his own bodyguard. It's diversion. So she's saying, I was to be a decoy. Before he could go further, I said, please let me get out. I want to get back to my baby in Miami. Finally, he agreed and drove me back to the airport. So, but the story doesn't end there. You think, well, her part's over. What else does she know? Well, after the assassination, she goes to the FBI with her information. Think about the information she could go to the FBI with. I know this guy Oswald that you say did it. He was at the Everglades, E. Howard Hunt's base. I was there. I saw him recruiting people for assassinations. He was in the car trip with me and Sturgis and all these other Cubans when we were running guns from Miami to Dallas. And then, of course, 2 days later, when Jack Ruby kills him, she says, well, I know that I saw Ruby in the hotel room 2 days, the day before the assassination, when we brought all the guns. He's the guy that knocked on the door and got mad that I was there. So she's telling the FBI all this and how she had been recruited by Sturgis and they were bringing weapons. This is a pretty amazing story. You'd think if Hoover had any interest in finding out the truth about the assassination, Marina Lorenz would be one of his prize witnesses, because she has inside information on not just a plot and not just weapons being transported to the site, but on these movers and shakers that have already been identified as important to what happened in Dallas, including Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby. She's in the center of all of it. But she was told by the FBI that they didn't want to know because, quote, those were CIA activities, not FBI. So they just brushed her off. By the way, and I've seen this over and over again with different witnesses. Any narrative that didn't support the public narrative that was already coming out that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, the FBI didn't care. They didn't want to know about it. And of course, we already know because of what happened with the letter that was sent to the Russian embassy and leaked. And and the Soviets knew because of Richard Case Nagel. This was a forgery by the FBI and CIA to set up Oswald. We already know that the FBI knew in advance of the assassination what was going to happen. So they knew before it happened, and they certainly knew after it happened. And anybody who came forward with a story that didn't support the narrative became really, really inconvenient. Anyway, Lorenz continues her testimony, quote, Sturgis later returned to Miami and bragged, quote, this is her saying what Sturgis said. We killed the president that day. You could have been part of it, part of history. You should have stayed. It was safe. Everything was covered in advance. No arrests, no real newspaper investigation. It was all covered. Very professional. This is the testimony she's given in court under oath. And this is the lawsuit that's being appealed. It was the initial case was won by E. Howard Hunt because they didn't have Marita Lorenz there to give this testimony. Now they do. And so this is the first publicly that anyone knows about this. So the jury reverses the verdict and rules in favor of the defendant, Liberty Lobby, throwing out the big penalty. And afterwards, in an interview, the jury foreperson, Leslie Armstrong, told the reporter, quote, the evidence clearly demonstrated that Hunt, E. Howard Hunt, and the CIA assassinated President Kennedy. And you say, well, how does this involve Miami? Well, again, all these operators that we just discussed came from Miami. There was a big car trip, a 1,300-mile car trip, but the meeting of all these conspirators for this off-the-board operation took place in Miami. Marita Lorenz was from Miami. Frank Sturgis was from Miami. E. Howard Hunt was from the Everglades, right on the outskirts of Miami. The two Cubans that went with, they were from Miami. So the only person that wasn't from Miami in this whole scenario was Jack Ruby. But everybody else was from Miami. The weapons came from Miami. So Miami is intricately involved in this. So that's the story of Marita Lorenz. Now, E. Howard Hunt denied it. I mean, he just kept denying it. Even though he lost the case, he denied it. But when Watergate happened, something happened to E. Howard Hunt's CIA cover, and he sort of got exposed because he was in the news. He was one of the Watergate 7 that got arrested. And people started looking into his background, and they found out a lot of information about this guy that starts to corroborate what. Now, of course, that's not until 72, between 72, 73, 74 in that time frame. But by the time Marita Lorenz gives her account of the story, it's not till the mid-80s. So he, even after Watergate, has another 10, 12 years where he could deny until Marita Lorenz tells her story publicly. So that's the timing of this. So E. Howard Hunt, we're not going to learn until years later his level of involvement. It wasn't a secret that he was in the CIA. He was an officer. That's not the point. It's all these covert operations that he was a part of. We don't really learn about E. Howard Hunt's level of involvement until Watergate happens, because Nixon in the Watergate tapes obsesses over E. Howard Hunt and how if they uncover that scab, talking about E. Howard Hunt, there's a hell of a lot of things. He knew. He was very concerned that the investigation into Watergate was going to uncover E. Howard Hunt's background in covert operations with the CIA. And of course, as former vice president, head of the 5412 committee, he knew all of the covert activities that the CIA had been involved in, that E. Howard Hunt had been involved in all of them. All right. He had been a veteran of the Bay of Pigs operation. He was one of the trainers of these Cuban paramilitaries. He was a liaison to the S-Force at Everglades. That's where Marita met him. He had actually been arrested, just like Frank Sturgis, because he had defied JFK's order to close Operation Mongoose Base at the Everglades. He launched, just like Sturgis did, a covert operation to land the S-Force in Cuba, try to assassinate Castro. So eventually, Uh, Bobby Kennedy, as Attorney General, had to arrest Sturgis and Hunt in violation for violating the Neutrality Act. So this is who we're talking about here. He is an anti-Castro zealot, part of that yet Castro squad that seemed to dominate the CIA in those days. He was what we call black operator. He operated in the shadows. Everything he was involved in was covert. So he was neck deep in all the CIA's anti-Cuban, anti-Castro operations. And then if you spin it forward, until we get to the 70s, he was recruited into the plumbers unit by, uh, you know, the CIA went to Nixon and said, uh, this is the interesting thing about Watergate. The CIA infiltrated the, the plumbers unit with their people. James McCord was CIA. The four Cubans who had been working with the CIA in Operation Mongoose. E. Howard Hunt was CIA. The only one that wasn't was G. Gordon Liddy. He was ex-FBI. So he gets in. This is when the CIA found out that Nixon had his own private investigative group called the Plumbers. They got real concerned about what the White House was up to. And so their favorite method of spying is infiltration. And so they infiltrated three different areas of Nixon's domain. They infiltrated the White House with security personnel in the Oval Office that actually were the ones responsible for changing out the tapes, the White House tapes, which is how we knew. It's how the CIA knew that the tapes existed because their people were changing the tapes. They also infiltrated the committee to reelect the president, CREEP, with James McCord was a security specialist. He was CIA. He was still on the CIA payroll. He was working for committee to reelect as a security specialist. They had several others of theirs working with the committee to reelect, and they also infiltrated the plumbers with guys like E. Howard Hunt. And so all these folks are reporting back to the CIA everything that's going on. This is why the CIA knew in advance Watergate was going to happen. And the whole thing was a setup. The whole thing was a setup. There's different ways to get rid of or neutralize a president who becomes a problem. In Kennedy's case, you had to kill him, okay? Uh, or at least they deemed that to be necessary. In Nixon's case, who also became a threat to the national security state, he was trying to make peace with the Russians. He went to Russia, went to China, trying to usher in the new period of détente, et cetera, et cetera. He became a threat, and they set him up with this Watergate burglary, got him impeached. He was going to be impeached. He forced him to resign, and they replaced him with Gerald Ford, which, ironically, who served on the Warren Commission after JFK assassination. So it's interesting in these two very, very famous, very public overthrows of public, very popular American presidents. Nixon had just won the 72 reelect in one of the largest uh, election victories in our nation's history. And within, you know, 6 months, he was gone. No, 6 months. Within 2 years, he was gone. Uh, so, and it's interesting that one required an assassination, the other required a resignation, a forced resignation, but the net result was the same. You replace the problem with somebody who's a solution. LBJ gave the CIA the war they wanted immediately, Vietnam, and the successor to Nixon, Gerald Ford, pardoned him, precluding on any kind of a trial. And in both of these, neither one was there ever a trial. That was the whole point of the cover-up. LBJ appointed the Warren Commission, one of which the members was Gerald Ford, and they came up with this. They put an official stamp on this narrative that Lee Harvey Oswald acted along. And of course, since Lee Harvey Oswald was killed, there's no trial. And you fast forward to 74, you go to Nixon, you say you're fixing to get impeached. And if you don't resign, you're going to lose your pension and you can be criminally charged as a citizen. unless you resign. If you resign, you'll keep your pension, and Ford will pardon you, and that'll guarantee no criminal trial later. And that benefits all of us. So it's not real hard to figure out how these things end up working. Anyway, E. Howard Hunt is square. He is the middle of all this. He's in the middle of what happened in 63 with JFK. He's in the middle of what happened in 72, Watergate with Nixon. And so when Nixon, those tapes get ordered to be released by the Supreme Court, people are listening to the tapes, they realize, holy cow, all he's talking about, he's not talking about Watergate. He's talking about E. Howard Hunt. He says, he's the key. He's the lever. You uncover that scab, there's a hell of a lot of things. He was obsessed with trying to figure out a way to cover up E. Howard Hunt's past. And if the Watergate Committee had been interested in really getting to the bottom of Watergate, they would have, instead of just trying to get rid of Nixon, they would have solved two crimes in one investigation, because it all leads back to JFK. And that's what Nixon was paranoid about. He's the one that put that S-Force together. E. Howard Hunt knows that. E. Howard Hunt was involved in that. And of course, what we didn't know until later is E. Howard Hunt was blackmailing the White House after Watergate to keep that all quiet. And Nixon was paying the money to him and his wife. And, so Nixon knows E. Howard Hunt is the key. He says so. But the investigators, the Watergate Committee, and all that kind of stuff, they never pursued it past Watergate. They thought, I don't know if they thought that or if they were so bloodthirsty to get rid of Nixon that when they had enough to get rid of Nixon, they stopped. If they had pursued it further, for example, in an open hearing, as they're listening to the Watergate tapes, Nixon keeps referring to Bay of Pigs and the Bay of Pigs guys. And finally, they stopped the tape, and the chair of the committee asks the witness in the stand at the table who's sitting there, who happens to be Bob Haldeman, who was Nixon's chief of staff, Mr. Haldeman, why does President Nixon keep talking about the Bay of Pigs and the Bay of Pigs guys? That happened in 61 before Nixon became president. Why on earth is he didn't have anything to do with that. Why is he worried about it? And Bob Haldeman says, well, it's code. Every time he says JFK assassination, or every time he says Bay of Pigs, he's talking about JFK assassination. Oh. And it was like a giant matzo ball just being dropped in the middle of the hearing, and no one pursued it. They just redirected and went back to talk about Watergate related stuff. But what Haldeman was saying is that Nixon was concerned that these people that were in custody, these Bay of Pigs guys, were involved in the Bay of Pigs operation, which is his code for saying JFK assassination. And he's saying these guys are the key, they're the lever. You uncover that scab, there's a hell of a lot of things. He's more worried about that than he is Watergate. So if you have any investigative sense about you at all, you say, wait a second, these two things are connected. But they didn't. It would have been a seminal moment in United States history. And you talk about the mother of all scandals. There thinks Watergate was so big, it pales in comparison. What if you put Watergate and the JFK assassination together? All right, anyway, E. Howard Hunt, to his death, his dying day, denied that he had anything to do with JFK assassination, denied that he was in Dallas, denied. It's all he did. But by the time we get to his, this is what happens with people when they're on their deathbed. They are more willing to spill the beans, I guess. And he gives a very famous deathbed confession to his son and to a reporter. It's recorded. It's a picture of him on his deathbed. And he makes a written and taped deathbed confession to his son, St. John, and writer Eric Hamburg in 2004. This is 20 years after Maria Lorenz told her story. And he has denied. This is one of the reasons why a lot of people didn't believe Maria Lorenz for a long period, because the principal in the story, Howard Hunt, kept denying it. But in his deathbed confession, he basically corroborates everything Maria Lorenz had said 20 years earlier. He said he was invited to Miami again, in 63 by Frank Sturgis. And a buddy of his who later gets arrested at Watergate self-admitted assassin. And there he gets recruited for an quote, off the board operation. This is the same lingo that Maria Lorenz used. She called it off the books. The off the board operation by David Morales. Uh, and according to Hunt, Sturgis and Morales had been recruited by Bill Harvey. And we've talked about all these people. So if you've been following, you know who these people are. David Morales was a CIA enforcer. He was in Dallas. He was in Chicago. He was later in L.A. In Chicago to try to assassinate Nick Kennedy 20 days prior to Dallas. Then he's in Dallas. The assassination happens. Then 5 years later, he's in L.A. when RFK is assassinated, and later admits to killing both of them. So he says, "I was recruited by Sturgis. Or I was recruited by David Morales." Uh, I was invited to Miami by Sturgis. I was recruited there by David Morales, and both Sturgis and Morales had been recruited by Harvey. So he's just given sort of a flow chart there, how this all worked. And it was an off the board operation. So he said, well, what was the off the board operation? Well, he says Harvey and Morales had hired sharpshooters to kill JFK, and that he was going to be involved in the transportation of weapons to Dallas, which Murray Lorenz told that story. His official role in the assassination, according to his own words, was to act as a, quote, bench warmer. He was not one of the participants in the assassination. He was a ready and willing substitute. And according to E. Howard Hunt, LBJ was the guy at the top who signed off on the plot. So he's implicating the next president. And he actually, and I've included it here, on a 3x5 business card, he drew out the flow chart. He said LBJ was at the top. He was the current vice president, which means he's head of the 5412 committee. Under him was Cord Meyer, who was in charge of the CIA's fake defector program, which Lee Harvey Oswald was a part of. He was also involved in Operation 40. And under Cord Meyer was David Morales, Bill Harvey, the assassination experts themselves. And he names as the assassin behind the picket fence the French assassin, the French gunman, Lucien Sarti. He didn't write out Lucien Sarti's name. That's who we know it to be. He says, now, I don't know what to believe about the French gunman. Listen, there's been so many people who have claimed to be the assassin behind the picket fence. Okay. You got James Files, who represented the Chicago crime family. He said he was there. He personally said he was there. Here you have E. Howard Hunt saying, no, it was the French gunman, Lucien Sarti. After his death, Roscoe White left behind a diary. It said he was there. He was representing the CIA as a infiltrator in the Dallas Police Department. There are some who believe, some of the LBJ's attorneys believe that the LBJ assassin, Mac Wallace, was there. We know Mac Wallace was actually in the sniper's nest in the Texas School Depository Building. He left a 31-point match fingerprint on a box up there. So we know this. LBJ's assassin was in the Texas School Book Depository Building. I happen to believe that Roscoe White was the shooter behind the fence, and Mac Wallace was the shooter in the Texas School Book Depository Building. David Morales was the shooter in the Dell Tex Building, and Chicago crime family assassin Charles Nicoletti was the shooter in the Records Building. And they all had teams and spotters, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, this is E. Howard Hunt's confession right before he died. So, and again, this plot all came out of Miami. And that's the story, the Marita Lorenz story, which she told in 85. And then it was corroborated in 2004 by E. Howard Hunt. All right, the third guy I want to talk about today had a sizable impact on the JFK assassination pre, during, and after is George Joannides. A lot of people don't know about this guy. He had joined the CIA and became chief of the psychological warfare branch of the JM Wave Station in Miami. So he was in their psych warfare operations. He worked closely with the Directorio Revolucionario Estudiantil, DRE. This is a militant right-wing anti-communist, anti-Castro, anti-Kennedy group. These are these military-age, fiery, combative Cuban exiles that want to go home. And so he worked with these guys. This was also a group that Lee Harvey Oswald worked with in New Orleans in August 1963. So what this means is that George Joanides and Lee Harvey Oswald worked together for the CIA in close contact with this same group, the DRE. And nobody knew about this. The Warren Commission never knew about it. It was hidden from them. The House Select Committee didn't know about it. It was hidden from them. And you'll see how they hid it from them in just a minute. But George Joanides was neck deep. This is a CIA operator who was working with the guy who's going to be blamed for the assassination, the patsy, Lee Harvey Oswald. But no one's going to know. Remember, they can't allow for any connections. He's got to be a lone nut. He can't have any connections to the agency, to the CIA. And yet, here is a guy who is high up in psych warfare in the JM Wave Station in Miami, who's working with him, infiltrating the DRE. And no one knew about it. In 1976, when the House Select Committee starts investigating this, the CIA appoints Joanides to be the liaison from the agency to the House Select Committee. And they didn't reveal to the committee that Joanides had actually been involved with Lee Harvey Oswald back in 1963. They hid that from the committee. And they said, here, we're sending you a guy who will act as liaison. Anything you need, you go to him. He'll get it for you for the purposes of your investigation. Not realizing, House Select Committee did not realize that they were actually sending this guy because no one knew better than he did what information could be damning to the CIA or information about Oswald could lead back to the CIA. No one knew better than he did. And so he acted as a filter. He didn't act as a liaison. He acted as a filter. Critics believe that Joanides was involved in a conspiracy to link Oswald with the government of Castro. That's the sheep dipping operation, setting him up. Remember now, Richard Case Nagel went to he was that double agent, and he went to KGB and he says they're setting him up. These Leopoldo and Angel and these Cubans and these right-wing anti-communist, anti-Castro, organizations that he has infiltrated, he didn't realize it, but they're setting him up to be the patsy in the assassination of Kennedy. And so George Joanides is one of these guys. He's not Leopoldo or Angel. He's actually higher than them, and he's the one giving them the orders how to set him up. And now he's the guy in the 70s, late 70s, who's the liaison between the CIA and the House Select Committee. And of course, the House Select Committee didn't find out about this till years later. Is it any wonder that the House Select Committee comes out, says, yeah, he died as a result of conspiracy, talking about Kennedy, but it was the mob. These guys like Joanides are placed in these positions to steer everything away from the CIA. And if it implicates the mob, so be it. If it implicates the Cubans, so be it. As long as it doesn't implicate the CIA. George Joanides is the guy that steered everything towards the mob, which is what they eventually concluded. Now, he dies in 90. And finally, in 1990, it's revealed about his involvement with the DRE in 63 and Oswald's involvement with the DRE in 63, and they overlapped there and how they'd both been involved with each other. And so investigators start looking at it as a result of documents being released. We start to see a picture coming together as pieces of the puzzle come together as a result of documents being dribbled out over years. In recent years, investigators into the assassination of JFK have campaigned for the CIA to release all the files about George Joanides. That's what we hope to learn in this latest batch of files. Trump is declassifying, is learning more about Joanides, because the more we learn about Joanides, the more we discover the CIA was intricately involved in setting Oswald up to be the patsy. You follow Joanides around, and then, of course, then them appointing him as the liaison to the House Select Committee is instrumental in steering the investigation away from the CIA, and is evidence the CIA was involved in a cover-up. That's why they put him in that position. The chief counsel of the House Select Committee, Robert Blakey, it infuriated him what he found out. This is a picture of him circled on the right. And I could summarize what he said, but I just want to read his words because this guy's still alive, and this is what he believes as a result of what the CIA did by putting Joanides in this position without telling the House Select Committee who this guy was and his involvement with Lee Harvey Oswald is the biggest indication of guilt that you could ever imagine. So I'm just going to read his words to you. He says, quote, what contemporaneous reporting is or was in the agency's DRE files? We will never know. For the agency now says that no reporting is in the files. Are we to believe that its files were silent in 64 or during our investigation? I don't believe it for a minute. Money was involved. It had to be documented, period. End of story. The files and the agency's agents connected to the DRE should have been made available to the commission and the committee. Joanides was the one who told him there were no files. There's no information about any of our agents being connected to the DRE when he himself was connected to the DRE. Anyway, continuing, that the information in the files and the agents who could have supplemented it were not made available to the commission and the committee amounts to a willful obstruction of justice. Obviously, too, it did not identify the agent who was its contact with the DRE at the crucial time that Oswald was in contact with it, George Joanides. They actually, under false pretenses, sent us George Joanides and said, this guy has no involvement. He's just going to be our liaison between, whenever you need something from the CIA, go through George. And he didn't have any dog in this fight. Turns out he had more than a dog in the fight. Continuing on, during the relevant period, the committee's chief contact with the agency on a day-to-day basis was Scott Breckenridge. We sent researchers to the agency to request and read documents. The relationship between our young researchers, law students who came with me from Cornell, was anything but happy. Nevertheless, we were getting and reviewing documents. Breckenridge, however, suggested that he create a new point of contact person who might facilitate the process of obtaining and reviewing materials. He introduced me to Joanides, who he said he had arranged to bring out of retirement to help us. He told me that he had experience in finding documents and he thought he could be a help to us. I was not told of Joanides' background. This is exactly how they infiltrated the Clay Shaw, Jim Garrison's office. They sent somebody down who pretended like he was a retiree from the CIA and he could help them in this investigation. And we talked about him in the last episode. The Bernardo de Torres. He comes in, he says, "Oh, I'm retired, but I could help you. And it looks like you need help." But this is their favorite trick, to infiltrate and rat fuck the investigation. Bernardo de Torres was the infiltrator pretending to be retired CIA in the Clay Shaw trial. Jim Garrison. And here we are in House Select Committee almost a decade later. They're using the same tactic. We got this retired guy, Joanides. He has experience with documents in the CIA. He could help you. Blakey says, quote, I was not told of Joanides' background with the DRE, a focal point of the investigation. Had I known who he was, he would have been a witness who would have been interrogated under oath by the staff or by the committee. He would never have been acceptable as a point of contact with us to retrieve documents. In fact, I have now learned, as I note above, that Joanides was the point of contact between the agency and DRE during the period Oswald was in contact with the DRE. So Blakey's figuring it out. He's like, my God, this guy he knew Oswald, and he was, and here he's pretending like he didn't have any dog in this fight at all. He continues that the agency would put a material witness in as a filter between the committee and its quest for documents was a flat-out breach of the understanding the committee had with the agency that it would cooperate with the investigation. The committee's researchers immediately complained to me that Joanides was, in fact, not facilitating, but obstructing our obtaining of documents. No kidding. I contacted Breckenridge and Joanides. Their side of the story wrote off the complaints to the young age and attitude of my people. They were certainly right about one question. The committee's researchers did not trust the agency. Indeed, that is precisely why they were in their positions. We wanted to test the agency's integrity. I wrote off the complaints. I was wrong. The researchers were right. I now believe the process lacked integrity precisely because of Joanides. Um, this is a photograph. Shane O'Sullivan uh, claims that Joanides was also in L.A. 5 years later when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. And this is the picture that he's put in his book. Uh, and I've circled it in red there. Some dispute about whether or not that is Joanides or not, but I just thought I would include that because it's not out of the realm of possibility when you start to see a pattern here. All these other CIA guys that moved from one assassination to the next. I mean, just giving you David Morales, for example, from Chicago to Dallas to LA. Harvey. Uh, there's when that's your job, that's your area of expertise. If there's a big hit to go down, you're going to be called on. If you're there, you're clearly involved. That's what you do. So anyway, those are three more CIA operators, all coming from Marita Lorenz, Miami, recruited in Miami. E. Howard Hunt, again, Miami for the off-the-board operation, and then George Joanides, who ran psych warfare out of JM Wave, and then was instrumental, we find out later, in setting up Oswald to be the patsy, and then infiltrated the House Select Committee to steer the investigation towards the mob and away from the CIA. All these people are coming from Miami. Miami is the epicenter of all things JFK. So anyway, that's the episode 5. Hope everybody enjoyed that. And until next time, everybody have a blessed day. Thank you.